Well, just want to say thank you so much for everyone for giving their time to come tonight. It's yeah, it's really exciting to kick this off. The transitions are so important in autism. In the last couple of years, they've been really become quite prevalent. Um, you see it now in schools and secondary schools, very, very common third level, and even going down to preschools. So we really wanted to kind of delve more into this topic, and one of the big ones will be independent living skills. So that's why we brought Stephen on board, because Stephen has a lot of experience in with independent living skills, and just might be more the fundamentals on the inside of it. So we yeah, we're really lucky to have Stephen tonight, and just to really kind of delve into maybe the but more the behind the scenes of independent living skills and what it maybe takes to support a person get there. So I just want to let you know you can ask any questions during it. You can ask myself questions. You can just raise your hand down or even turn your mic on and then ask a question, and hopefully myself and Stephen can answer it. And after the presentation, if you have any questions, you can just fire them on. And if there's any questions that are a bit more detailed, you can get in touch with the info line, and you can send me an email or call, and I'll be able to follow it up, and we can have more of a detailed kind of and specific conversation. So I'll just hand it over to Stephen next, if that's okay. And great. Thanks a mil, Stephen.
Thanks very much, Brandon, for that lovely intro.
Ah.
So today, yeah, just to reiterate what Brandon was saying there, if anybody has any questions or any queries at all throughout the presentation, we're happy to make it as interactive as possible. And either myself or Brandon will do our best to answer the question. And if we don't have the answer, we will certainly get it to you in the coming days. So today's presentation is just on autistic autonomy and independence throughout the lifespan. And I suppose we're going to try and focus on factors and conditions and circumstances that nurture skills, growth, and independence. So really looking at the human factors as opposed to just condensing it to the skills. So the first slide, or I suppose what we're talking about here is, trying to support the person to be their most successful, independent, authentic self. I suppose the first piece there is just about sometimes when you're supporting people, you'll see in practices that people are looking for differences to fade. And it's not really about supporting the autistic person to be like everyone else. It's trying to support them to be their own authentic self and to grow, and what circumstances will nurture that. So it's about trying to co-create the environment to build independence. And that's not about avoiding challenges. It's about supporting the person to face them, looking at challenges through a rights-based lens. I suppose if we look at, I suppose, over the last 2 or 3 years and the experience we've all had in terms of COVID, we ourselves are reimagining our office environments, our own work-life balance. We're looking at pressing resets. We're looking at our own accommodations and changes that can be made to make the environment and to make circumstances work for our own work-life balance. So it's looking at those levels of accommodations and adjustments and what they look like for each individual, that maybe needs support. And I suppose the type of mindset that I suppose works towards those outcomes actively, and I would refer to that often as a discovery mindset, looking at possibilities, opportunities, intentional collaboration. It's engagement with employers, engaging with networks, just trying to to have the trajectory of that outwardly and to support the person to grow. I suppose just in terms of the rights-based lens, I suppose it struck me when I was preparing this presentation that rights are something that can be, they can be challenged for any individual, regardless of any labels or any diagnosis. And I was at an event there about 2 weeks ago in Sage, and in Dr. Stevens' hospital up beside Euston Station, and one of the guys that was leading out and talking about independence and the erosion of that, and potentially, and he was in terms of, he was talking about the banking sector, but he described a story whereby he went up about 10 or 15 years ago to visit his aunt at Christmas when she was in a nursing home, and she said to him that for the dinner that day, that she was a diabetic, so she had been told that she wasn't going to be having cheesecake. And the person in the bed next to her was an alcoholic, so he was told he wasn't having a drink. So between the two of them, they decided to swap. So she was giving him her whiskey and he was giving her the cheesecake. So between the two of them, they were actually trying to navigate the circumstances, and these were just people, natural part of the of the lifespan, life cycle, and they found themselves in that situation. So it's just to be very aware that rights and the way rights can be challenged or they can be stripped from anybody. So it's very important that us as practitioners in this sector, that we're always trying to defend and uphold them, and to realize that they're inherent and people are entitled to them. So that's just to try and frame, where we're going today. Um, so the next slide really is on, I suppose, accommodations within the environment. And here, I suppose it struck me that historically, like when we start looking at in changes in the environment, you know, houses and I suppose the environment start becoming more and more populated with pictures and Velcro, and that it's actually deeper in terms of the environment. I was on a course there a few weeks back with a lady from Autism Journeys, and she was talking about a girl, and I have it here on the slide as the girl, the green jumper scenario. So she was actually talking to a person who had experienced trauma, and she was doing counseling with the person. And the person had said that if they don't have clarity, they have trauma. So for all the sessions that I suppose preceded that, the person wore the same green jumper for each counseling session. They wore their hair the same way. They wore what was it, the same fragrance, and they kept the environment and their presentation as predictable as possible for the person receiving support. And I suppose that was accommodations in relation to that particular person's sensory palette, which was very sensitive. So they were framing the scenario so that person had predictability that they needed, and hence the absence of trauma. So it's just about trying to, I suppose, really appreciate, the impact on the person, on the autistic person, in terms of if they have prediction errors, and the uncertainty that can, assert on them, and then consequently then the fatigue that they might have from trying to navigate that all the time, So clear communication, framing scenarios for people, setting predictability, explaining now and next, all person-centered, and all, as I said, in terms of sensory, everybody has their own sensory palette. So it's just working and being attuned to that in terms of the provision of support. I suppose the next slide, I wanted to talk a little bit about the conditions that I suppose have the potential to reduce confidence, development and independence. So just in terms of, I suppose, terminology reflection, there are some, I suppose, phrases or terminology that still frequents dialogue. Sometimes you'll hear people referring to low functioning. I suppose non-verbal, when really, I suppose, everybody has an expressive language and everybody has a way of communicating, and it's not just to reduce it down to the absence of something, it's to try and see what is there and working with that presentation and with that particular need. Sometimes you hear a lot of terminology around compliance, and I suppose that can make people very submissive if that's the terminology that's around. I'm very interested as well in the debate in terms of, you hear people talking about the importance to give choice. But I suppose from a number of conferences I've been at in the last year, there's more and more literature and, I suppose, discourse that's actually saying that choice is not ours to give. It's not something you give. It's something that somebody inherently has as a rights bearer from the age of 18, because children don't have rights in the same way. But there still is, I suppose, people thinking that choice is ours to give, but in actual fact, it's the person's right. They automatically have it. It's inherent. And then just on respite, I think it's a corrosive term, just like it's a break from something unfavorable. And I suppose that type of terminology, I think it just does damage to people's confidence. And if you're really trying to build somebody up to be independent, it's all about giving confidence and nurturing and the environment. And the last piece here is just on independence versus sameness. So it's not about trying to support somebody to grow to look like me or to look like you. People are to be supported to be their authentic self. Um, I was at a talk there a few months back, and one of the parents was saying that their child in school was being asked to wear a tie and to look like everyone else, and that's the sameness. And as the autistic child really struggled with wearing a tie, and really struggled with going to assembly, and from a sensory perspective, and the school was trying to really promote sameness. And I suppose what I think is very important to realize is that neurodiversity is not sameness. Neurodiversity is embracing the differences and the diversity of that. And so it's just very important, I suppose, from my perspective as a practitioner, that we don't confuse, independence with sameness. It's just nurturing that person to mature in confidence and growth and to be successful. And I obviously really understanding that successful has different connotations for all of us. It can be successful in your social life, successful in your friendships, in your work environment, in your home environment, whatever success means to you. And I suppose our role in Geel is to support somebody in pathways to find that success, you know. Um, So my next slide, I suppose this is about the framework to nurture independence. Um, I particularly like the last piece in this slide, so I don't want to do that by PowerPoint and read everything, but that the circle of support are fluent in the language of stress management, building social capital, and inclusion. That's something we've worked very hard on in Geel over the last number of years. I know to engage and to work in partnership with the HSE, with HICWA, with employers, with families, with parents, and with the full circle of support. And at the centre of that and front of house is the first person, the autistic person, and that they're what you call it, signpost and us, and we're just like trying to, in a sense, scaffold them or support them to build whatever their successful journey looks like. So we have three different models of support. There's the transition model, our day supports, and our community supports. I suppose, in Geel, we're really working towards inclusion and independence. One of the examples I wanted to give today was just one of the person we're supporting at the moment, and he's moving out of a congregated setting, which is, I suppose, commonly referred to as a designated centre, and there would be a number of, I think it's about 18 autistic people living there, and it wouldn't be aligned to his sensory palette. He wants his own home, he wants his own dominion, he wants to be able to set much more predictability in his environment, and that's his right. So we've worked with different housing bodies and CHO6, and he's transitioning into his home, I suppose, in the next 6 to 8 weeks. And the house has been designed in consultation with him and collaboration around his autism needs, sensories, the kitchen, the colours, floor, and he picked everything. We were running around with colour charts, and it was just fantastic to see him. And it's a great opportunity for him now to thrive, and it's natural supports. It's in the community. So that's a great chance for him. Another person that we were supporting in day supports, and we've moved away from day services because I suppose the term day services became very associated with buildings. And I suppose we were trying to look to supports and support. Like the best thing you can see from my perspective when we go to the day supports premises is that nobody's in it and everybody's off, whether they're off, enjoying themselves recreationally, or they're off joining clubs or out and about and making friendships. So we're really trying to work towards that in our day services. And one of the people we support now, we've been working on road safety with her. She's engaging with her own pharmacy. She's moved into a house recently and had her own housewarming party, which was fantastic for her to see. And I was lucky enough to get an invitation and to see her in that environment and thrive, and support with banking, friendships, confidence. So, and I suppose then our last model, the community support model. Um, I suppose that would be the model that it's really focusing on, I suppose what was it's really focusing on in kind of what I would refer to as an elastic model of support. So there's a lot of consultations, sessional based meetings with the person. And I suppose a term I use a lot is, you step forward when the person needs you. If the person has an interview and there's a bit of anxiety pre-interview, which we would all have, that you're there for the person if the person needs you. So you step forward at that moment, and then it's known what you got to, when to step back. Because in this particular model, if you're constantly stepping forward, that could be intrusive to the person. So it's just understanding when to step forward, when to step back, and when to step away. And that's a big feature of the community support model. And that's in recognition that progress and independence is not set in cement. It's not linear. Like, in terms of, you might step forward, step back, and step away, but you're not stepping away permanently. You could step away for, it could be for 3 or 4 days. You could get a call. It could be for 3 or 4 weeks. It's different for each person. And then, so sometimes it's step forward, step back, step away, and then repeat. Depending on it, it could be another interview. It could be a problem in work, whatever challenges the person meets. So all the time, you're trying to ensure that the model is agile and adapting to the needs of the person. And that flexibility and accommodation is a big feature of the community support. So I actually think it's a very progressive model. So we're on to the next slide. So I think I'm quoting your CEO here in terms of saying chance. But I thought it was very, very, very interesting and valid. So this is just on social role valorization, and it's I suppose it's about the establishment, enhancement, maintenance, and/or defense of valued social roles. So I suppose I've been working supporting autistic people for a number of years, and early on in the journey, we were very strong on community presence, i.e., we were out and about, we were in coffee shops, we were in pubs on holidays, but we really didn't go down the road of community integration. So our presence was there, but we weren't really integrating people, and I suppose where we're working now, like, just in terms of, we're trying to set people up to be successful, successful in our absence. I was speaking to one of our staff recently, and he was referring to when he was really looking at social role valorization and building purpose and connection into people's lives, that he had supported some of the people to go to sailing into wellness in Hote, and that again is community presence. But he said, following, like, really looking at social role valorization, he went away and he thought, I must ask the guys, does anybody want to be a member of this club? And membership, connections. Somebody expects you to be there next week. Find your tribe. If the commonality is sailing, if that's where people really enjoy spending time together, it's important the person to be a member. I suppose there's people we're supporting now, and one of the girls, she's doing a makeup course, and she's very much enjoying that, so much so that she actually signed up to do the same course a second time. There's one of the people we support is working in a soup kitchen, and he's actually in a designated centre in Fairview, and he's supporting, he's going in and he's working in a soup kitchen 5 days a week, from 7 to 10, and he's given back to his community. He's getting great. It's great for his self-esteem, for him feeling empowered, and so you see the growth, and I suppose the independence thriving for that person. Um, so it's just looking at people in terms of, their career, health and well-being, social life, independence, education, and active citizenship, and all those things. I think really that they support a person to grow, and that's pretty much that slide. So I'll crack on. So I referred there earlier on to elastic models and housing. So I suppose the reason I have housing down, and I know the subject today is independence, is the relationship between housing and maintaining autonomy throughout the life cycle is very critical, um, in terms of, you know, if you say you're younger or you're in your 20s, you might want maybe to be somewhere near a village or a town or a city centre. You might be younger, you might be going to a party, and then all of a sudden you want to change because you might you might prefer to move in your 30s or 40s into the suburbs. um you know People move intermittently throughout their own life cycle, and they make the accommodation or the property or the neighborhood work for them. And as I suppose historically, sometimes the model actually became a place of entrapment for people. You were in a day center, you were in, and it was very hard to move beyond that. And people's lives became, I suppose, designed more around the model or the building or the premises, when really and truly it's all about what the person wants and their needs and supporting them to grow. So it's just that the housing works for the person, and what was it? There's an elasticity to that, so that the housing changes in terms of any manifestations in the person's desire to live somewhere, to change. So it's very important, and particularly I suppose as people age, power and autonomy can become increasingly under threat throughout the age life cycle. So it's just very important that we're working now. We've set up a housing officer in Geel, and he's working very hard to support people to, I suppose, look at what housing options they want going forward and what type of supports. And it's just trying to really work to future proof their independence and their autonomy for them, and that we're actively working towards that. And I would say, really prematurely, if at all possible, because the lists are long. And yeah, it's just very important to be working towards that. I'm actually amazed it wasn't on our horizon earlier, and it's just something we've become very cognizant of the last 2 or 3 years. But we're making inroads. And this is just, I suppose, the rationale. So I suppose housing is very linked to self-determination. Also, when we're talking about predictability. Like we all have an element of predictability around our own homes. Who's calling over tonight? We can set. And if you think about the sensory palette we talked about earlier on, it's so important for wellness for autistic people. And I suppose the rationale for us is to try and mitigate the turbulence in people's lives arising from exposure to the Dublin rental market, lack of security and predictability, and establish greater dominion for people over their own homes. So that's the reason that we're really working on housing and housing options for people, and trying to be, I suppose, responsive to those needs and future needs. So just on to supported employment, and just to reiterate again that success means different things to different people, but for some people it's very much connected to employment. Um, and the supports that we look at, I suppose, to support to maintain people's independence, or to set the necessary conditions for them to flourish, is we have a supported employment officer, and he works with employers and with the people, autistic people looking for employment. And he's done like a thematic analysis over the last year on any issues that may have issues, and issues can be like issues of success or challenges, and that's just trying to shape the supports to try and set that relationship up to be successful. Engagement with employers. I suppose one of the things that came out of that analysis was one of the questions that the people we support were struggling most with that interview, because there were generally, and this is, I am talking in general terms, they were generally very strong on the competencies and the skills. But it was probably the more open-ended questions like, tell me about yourself. And that's not really a set question. There's no set answer. There's so many variables in that, and it came back that was a question that some of the people we support were struggling with at interview stage. So the job coaches were working with the people we support in terms of the questions like that, in terms of presentation, in terms of preparing for the interview, and then like debriefing after the process, because some of the people we support are very trained. But yeah, we've set up like a thing called My Future. It's a career learning and development tool, and it's very much geared towards, I suppose, people who are very tech savvy, and it's all on tablet, and it's very interactive. So that's working well. It's in its infancy, like as in the last year or so, but it's very promising. And in terms of partnerships, we set partnerships with Lifestyle Sports, Kerry Group, and there's a number of people moving into employment, and it's terrific to see. And then we've done research with DCU on barriers faced by autistic people in relation to employment, and as I am, we're involved there in the steering committee for that. And again, that just to backtrack a little bit, that's this whole thing around employment. It's so connected to self-esteem and purpose and social role valorization, and all these conditions set the person up to grow and to be their successful self. Just on to the next slide. So this is, I suppose, the relationship between risk, acceptance, learning opportunities, and independence. So I suppose learning opportunities are a very big feature of, I suppose, adolescence in most people, and we all kind of are exposed to learning opportunities that they actually enhance our own risk compass, and that's our own insights, discernment, exposure to learning opportunities. All these things we take for granted when we're the example I've given to Brendan before is sometimes you're driving, you take a corner too fast, and you say to your, oh, that's a learning, like, I'm not going to take a corner like that again. You know Friendships, people will figure out who they consider a good friend, a real friend. You've good and bad connections with people, and things like that change in your early 20s, but all the time it's linked to insights and growth opportunities. And it's very important that everybody has the same chance to these learning opportunities. And then there's the risk appetite, and this is where the relationship interplays. And this is the risk appetite of the circle of support. So in this instance, I would be part of the circle of support. Anyone who's in the person's immediate circle. And sometimes there's tensions for us as practitioners that we're trying to navigate between empowerment and protection. And so it's just we're trying to walk that line, that you're trying to support the person, but at the same time, you're not trying to eliminate learning opportunities and overly insulate them from them. And then there's the risk tolerance. And the risk tolerance, I suppose, would refer to the regulator in some circumstances. In Yale, it could be the board of management, the media in some incidents, and organizational and nationally. And I suppose when you see this actual platform play out in people's lives, it can be very, what you call it can be very interesting. And I suppose one of the examples that I was thinking of was one of the people we support a number of years back. I remember they were wanted to go and see 50 Shades of Grey, and that was what they wanted. A young man, I think he was about 22 at the time, and the parents were protective, and they were concerned about, I suppose, the content, adult content in the movie, and they were asserting that they really didn't want their 22-year-old son to go to 50 Shades of Grey, but he wanted to go. And I suppose, so we sat down, we talked about accommodations, we looked at showing the trailer to the person, and the person saw the trailer and still wanted to go. So they did go and see it. But I could see the tensions between empowerment and protection play out there. But this same person, who was 22, a few months later, wanted to go and see Santa. And that's where that person was, and they wanted to go and see Santa. But the manager then was saying that they didn't really feel it was age appropriate for the person to go and see Santa because they were 22. And again, we went back to the person, we tried it out, and the person wanted to go. So the person did go. But I suppose what really struck me was the number of people who have opinions in that person's life, and how important it is that that person isn't relegated or sidelined to the margins of their own life. And that, our role is really to try and amplify the autistic person's voice and vision of what they want. And, if anything, to try and sideline some of the noise around that. So that's but you see that actual particular risk framework play out in people's lives sometimes. And I'll just move on to the next slide. Oh, one other thing, just interestingly, I have a note here to mention this, was when I was at Sage there a few weeks back, they did talk a little bit about risk, and they were talking about the banking sector and the nursing sector are moving more and more away from labels and just to look at the issue at hand. So one of the examples they gave in terms of, I suppose, risk was that they had a family member ringing up, asserting that the autistic person shouldn't be allowed to have a card and with a tap facility. And they wanted this from a protection perspective because the person had been scammed, and they wanted the card taken away. And the bank were liaising with with the family and the person with autism. And this was going on for a number of weeks. But in the 6-week cycle that the conversation was going on, the sister who was asserting the point that the person who was scammed should not hold the card, they were scammed as well, right? So, I suppose what they were saying, and that was really a learning opportunity for that person to see anybody can be scammed. These things can happen to anybody, regardless of labels, regardless of, perceived capacities. And so the banking sector were saying in terms of risk to be really cautious about nuclear options like take the card, take the tap facility. And it's all about trying to really set the person up to have equity of options and to have the same as everybody else. So that was just on risk. Just fill this full slide up. So just in terms of risk, the risk continuum, I suppose I'm trying to get the journey to independence for people and the learning opportunities and growth that comes with that. So I suppose just to sum up, managing risk in the humanities should not focus on event predicting and eliminating risks. It is about providing a process for ensuring the potential benefits identified are increased and the likelihood of harm occurring as a result of taking risks are reduced. So if you look to the picture on the left here, you can see everything is focusing on lockdown and insulating and protection. And I suppose it struck me that over the last 2 or 3 years, when we as a nation were very subject to COVID rules and to, I suppose, restrictions on our movement and restrictions, that it actually has the potential to be a very empathy building platform for us to understand, if other people are subject to any restrictions on their independence or rights, and that how dependent we all were for a number of months on things being communicated to us hanging on every word that Tony Houlihan was saying about when we're back down to level 3 or level 2, and that any restrictions weren't permanent, and how important all that was to us. So I think this is an opportunity for us to be to really understand different positions and understand that in a way that we possibly wouldn't have done before. And then on the image on the right, I suppose one of the things that came to me was Temple Grandin wrote an article, I think it was called Thinking in Pictures, and she was saying that there was a stage there a number of years back where she was flying over to deliver a conference, and she's an autistic lady and lecturer, and she missed her flight, and she was very, very dependent on templates. So for her, a template was, I've been in this position before. This is how I managed. These were my coping strategies, and these like were helped her navigate the stressful moment she was in. But in this particular instance, she missed her flight, but she had never missed a flight before, and she didn't have a template. So she had to retreat to a quiet part of the airport, and she experienced, significant distress. But she managed to get through that situation, and she managed to cope and to wait for the flight, and she managed to get to her destination. And a few years later, the same thing happened, and she missed the connecting flight. And she said, now I have a template. Now I know what I did before. So she was exposed to the learning opportunity. She was exposed to the stress of it, but it was a growth moment for her. And now what you call it, she's able to, I suppose, deal with those things better as a result of having to face them. And one of the other examples I wanted to talk about, and this was, I was at the As I Am conference about 2 months back in the Grand Hotel in Malahide, and one of the girls got up and was talking about risk. And very often when people discuss masking, they talk about people trying to mask their autistic traits or tendencies. And in this particular instance, the girl was talking, and she was saying that her parents were nervous about her cycling, and particularly about her cycling around London. And as a result, she hadn't told them she was cycling around because they were being very, very protective of her. So she was cycling around, she was becoming very independent. She learned skills, she was able to navigate that particular challenge, and she was masking her growth and her talent and from her parents. And it took her 2 years to tell them. So it's just very important to, I suppose, to be aware of all those learning opportunities, and so to be there, a champion of growth for people, Next slide now. So happiness. I suppose in Geel, we've been looking at happiness, and it's something that made a strategic plan about 6 or 7 years ago. And I was absolutely delighted because I think it's so important. And I know, it's very difficult to measure, and it looks different in different people. But I think it's a really important attribute, and it's really important to support people and to be happy, But I suppose where we are in our thinking on it is that we would see happiness as being generally characterized by feelings of joy and contentment, but not the absence of distress. And I suppose that's a new development for us, because historically we might have tried to support people to avoid stressful situations or to avoid, and but now we will support people, I suppose, to maybe meet those stressful moments, if it's employment, if it's an interview, if it's learning to drive, if that's the person's will and preference, we're really working towards supporting them to grow and to be independent, and I suppose to navigate those challenges, So where was it there? Yes. So regardless of autistic people's support needs, communication style, individual independence, everyone's entitled to the same human rights. This is the core to the concept of neurodiversity, respect, dignity, and ultimately acceptance. So on to the last, or the second last slide here. So this, I suppose, is just when I was thinking about same chances. This is, current challenges and opportunities. So I suppose if you look at the first image, you can see like that there's different outcomes for the three people. And in the second image, there is some flexibility adjustments. And then I suppose in the third image, you can see that the cause of the inequity has been addressed, and that every person at the match has the same, what you call, a chance to to enjoy everything there. And I suppose it's about the concept in terms of independence on barrier removal. And in this particular incident, the barrier is physical, and the inequity has been addressed. But I suppose it's just to say that the barriers sometimes can be bias. The barriers can be the mindsets of people who are heavily based in protection, and people who are heavily based in, in one particular area, and in maybe not listening to the voice of the first person, the autistic person. All these things can be barriers. So it's just being important to remember that the person is a rights bearer, and to support them, with adjustments, and whatever adjustments will look like for that person, so that they have equity in outcomes. And I think I'm on to the last slide. Yep. So that's the presentation, Brendan.
No,
That's
that
it.
was great.
So
That was great, Stephen. No, I was I was just taking a few notes when you were presenting, and just one of the things I was thinking about myself when I started off my career, I would have been very passionate about independent living skills, but it's changed so much over the years that I would have went in thinking it was just imparting skills on people. And then maybe the end goal is that, and that's one of the reasons I kind of wanted you to come on, is just to maybe to talk about the fundamentals of what's behind independent living skills, because I've done it myself. I've supported autistic people go to independent living skills courses, and it doesn't really fit the person. So that's why today wanted to more say it at the end of the presentation, to jump in to say it's actually about understanding the person, and it's like essentially creating a holistic package around them that really buys into the person. And every autistic person is different, so it's really, I think the fundamentals is the most important thing to kind of build that foundation, because there's a ton of independent living skills courses out there, or transitions to it, but it's all about getting that buy-in with the person to get to that goal, and everyone's path and journey is different. So that's what I just really wanted. That's what I wanted to kind of get. Hopefully people kind of got from this presentation, is that everyone's journey is different, but it's just kind of understanding the person and then kind of moving along with them in partnership. Yeah, I just want to say, if anyone had any questions, you can please fire away, and we can, hopefully myself and Stephen can answer. But again, no pressure as well. But it's
yeah, and just to add to that, Brendan, it's the space for the person. And you're talking about like courses, independent courses, living skills, like they can be very prescriptive and very directive, and it's all I think it's all about the human factors, and supporting the person to grow, and to maybe look for what they, and giving the person space to figure that out. Yourself, we're younger and we think we want to be this, or we want to work in this area, and then we're a little bit older, and our trajectory of a career or whatever, it changes, or it takes different avenues. So just giving people space within that.
Yeah, and that, I find that's where a lot of masking behaviors can come in as well. When they'll do an independent living skill through more out of compliance, because if you do it, then maybe mom or dad, or a brother or sister or a staff member might kind of get off their back essentially. But if you kind of give that person a little bit of buy-in and understand them, and really understand their perception of the independent living skill, whatever it is, if it's driving or getting ready to go to college, I think that buy-in makes things so much more successful for the person. Sorry, Stephen's had a question there. 1 second. Yeah, this question from Josephine: is there a way to reduce the anxiety to foster independence?
I give you an example of a way we've tried to reduce anxiety for a person. Um, because anxiety has different origins in different people. For some people, it might be like social anxiety, it might be a technical challenge. I sometimes get anxious around IT. So the origins are different for us all. But there's a person that we're supporting at the moment, and they've moved to their own apartment, and they're having anxiety. But the anxiety is being generated sometimes by the fact that there's a shared foyer in the apartment complex, and the interactions that ensue in the lobby area, and the unpredictability of that, and that's driving anxiety for the person that we're supporting. So I suppose we're working with the person, I've been really listening to the person, trying to help them to understand all the interactions and the different variables in that environment. But the person is strongly saying that it's a stressor for them. So on a very practical level, we've gone back to DCC, and we're looking for an own door apartment for this person where they can circumvent that anxiety, because the person doesn't want to be facing this on a daily basis, and it's a triggering for them. So how we would support each person with anxiety, I think, would be very different, because as with everything, there's a person-centeredness to anxiety. That's the best way I can answer it, Brendan. Unless
Yeah.
you can.
Yeah, no, I would just add to that as well. And one thing I found is a kind of communication format, because it could be that if that person is having anxiety, how are you might sit down with them and say it verbally, say it to them. But sometimes I find giving like a neurodivergent person is giving options in terms of which way do you want to discuss this? Do you want this presented through, like, and it might sound unusual, but because sometimes it can be quite anxiety inducing, the thought of actually having to confront someone, and it kind of ties into that, the low arousal approach. And I've often given people the options of oh, 1 second. Sorry, I got a lot dropped out there for a second. So I've often given people the options of which way they want to communicate what's causing them anxiety, and it could be something as simple as, would you prefer to say it over text? Is there time after your favorite movie that you want to sit down and watch it? It's just kind of stepping into that person's world. And because sometimes even talking about an independent skill can really kind of escalate anxiety. So I would just even broach format, and even asking a person, can you talk about it first, because that can even de-escalate, give the person time to process it, and hopefully de-escalate some of the anxiety. And then they might be able to kind of foster the independence a little bit better and feel like they're more in control, because all anxiety is really a loss of control. So if you can give back that control, it's just going to make it's going to make your message get received better. But I just have another question there. Hi, any tips on how to help my daughter overcome anxiety over using public transport by herself? She's starting a PLC course in September. So yeah, just I can jump in quickly, Stephen. So I would have done that a lot last couple of years myself with prior to coming to as I am, in terms of using public transport. But it's really just creating a transition plan. I found, again, given that kind of control back, just I can give a quick example of one of my colleagues today. I was just telling her we were doing this presentation, and she said prior to coming to As I Am, she was so nervous and having almost panic attacks about going into the office. And then one of our colleagues who was on the interview panel was also autistic. They sent the candidate, who's now an employee, a pack that explained what the front door looked like, what the stairs looked like, what the office was going to look like, who was going to be sitting at the desk. So if you apply that to the using public transport by yourself, it's kind of going back to the very start, and even kind of giving your daughter that control. And it could even be whatever way she wants to, like, even it could be using an iPad and having pictures download it for, or whatever it does that kind of gives her that little bit of clarity. And there's different apps. There's an app called Canva. You can make a digital pack that explains this. It's just there's different things that you can use. But Stephen, you might have a more
No,
insight on it as well.
just on a very practical level, like if your daughter is using public transport and if that's anxiety, you know, 6 o'clock on the buses like would give me anxiety sometimes. It's like it's not in a very nice environment. So, you know, on many levels it's very understandable, but I suppose it's just trying to introduce the person to maybe if they could go on off-peak times, you know, 10 o'clock or Saturday morning or times where it's not as busy and that the sensory invasion is not as bad. And I suppose just trying to support them to be comfortable in possibly in more comfortable circumstances and slowly adjust I suppose, to using public transport, just on an incrementally be exposed to the challenge.
Yeah, and just to even add on that, I found sometimes it's almost data collection from the person, you know, and I've done it before, and again, it might sound unusual. It's even just having a little survey you can do online with the person, and then with that, you could have 10 answers. Like eight of them could be void, you know, it could be two things that you didn't realize that are actually causing her anxiety, and she might not know, and then you can put plans in place to kind of circumvent those moments, you know. So I think this is trying to break the whole picture down on what's actually going on and then build it back up again and present it to your daughter, and she will hopefully be able to kind of dictate the terms on what's going to help her reduce the anxiety.
I know one of the people we support, it's actually the noise and the multiple voices, and you know, and they actually need to wear ear defenders. I am on
Yeah.
public transport, and that works for them. So, like Brendan said, it's probably trying to get to the root. It's important to person to say, well, what is actually inducing the anxiety for them, and is there anything that can be done from an accommodation perspective, from an adjustment perspective, anything that we can do? Always trying to look at trying to make the adaptations to the environment or how we can support the person in those circumstances.
Yeah, and Orla, you can also feel free to call the information line as well. We can talk about it in more detail if you want as well. So yeah, but hopefully that adds some insight. Does anyone else have any more questions? Just have one more coming through now. Ah, grand. No, I think that's it. But perfect. Well, guys, I just want to say to everyone, thank you so much for coming. And Stephen, obviously, thank you so much for giving your time. It was really, really insightful and so helpful. So it's but yeah, so
All right.
thank you so much, Stephen.
Thanks, Brendan. Mind yourself. Thanks, everyone.